Welcome to this week's class. We're going to be looking at coding standards and then dive into selection, which you will discover is extremely important. To start with, I would like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians upon the land of which Curtin University's Bentley campus resides, and I acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. So everything we do in this unit has a purpose, and that purpose is found in these unit learning outcomes. So all the things we do tie back to these unit learning outcomes. What's our outline for this session, for this set of videos? We're going to be looking at coding standards, Boolean operations, we're going to look at if, then, else statements, as well as switch statements. Well, let's get started. Coding standards. It's something you're going to hear a lot about throughout your degree, and it's really important because it's through the standards that people are assisted with understanding. It's through standards that the cognitive load of you and your team can be reduced so that the code you write and the cognition power, I should say, that you use is about the code you're writing and developing, rather than trying to understand something that, although important, could be understood if it was written better, hence coding standards. So when we're thinking of coding, you want to code for your future self. Now this is really important because it's your future self that you want to make happy, which sounds a bit ridiculous, but what you don't want to do is go, I wonder what I was thinking when I wrote this code. It's not helpful. So what your code does today, so when you're coding and typing it up and what it does today, okay, tomorrow it might not be so obvious. Hence, code for your future self. So when they start, or when you start coding tomorrow or in 3 months or 6 months time, you know what's going on because you coded for your future self. When you're writing the code today, it's very obvious what you're thinking today, but in a week, a month, a day, it may not be so obvious. Hence, when you code to a standard, it removes a whole lot of the unknown out of it. I say create code that your future self will thank you for. Now this is really, I think it's really important because in that 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years time, when you go back to your code because you need to update, modify, change or do something to it, and you go, oh my goodness, this person wrote phenomenal code. That's really what you want to have. And with that, not only do you want your future self to be happy, you want your team to be happy, to go, oh my goodness, this is outstanding code. In the form of naming, what on earth do I mean by in the form of naming? We as developers, we are forever creating names. Names for classes, for methods, for variables, for constants. There's so many things that we are creating names for. So we want to be thinking about what standard are we using when we start to name things. Now we call these, when we're naming things, the names are known as identifiers, okay? So why? Because they identify what we're doing. They identify that block of memory. They identify really the variable that we're going, and we want meaning in that. So we need to give a lot of thought to our identifier names. Really, it's very important. Okay, now the reason it's important, I've got listed here. We want the code to be readable. Okay, so when someone sits down to read the code, they go, oh, this makes perfect sense. Okay, which is part of understandable. And maintainable. If it's readable, if it's understandable, generally it's quite maintainable because we know what's going on. So when we're naming things, they need to be unique, okay? They need to be meaningful, because if they're not meaningful, what do they mean? Unambiguous. We want it clearly articulated in the name what that variable is. they need to be consistent. So if I'm using a particular pattern of writing names, consistently use that pattern. And we will use a camel case type of naming system. And I say enhanced by case. Clearly identify when we use case, that should identify things. So what are some of the rules for identifiers? Okay, in Java, it consists of letters, digits, underscores, or $signs. That's it. Also, you cannot start, okay, you cannot start a variable with a digit. You can't use a reserved word. What are reserved words? Things like this. If, okay, if is a reserved word because we use it in particular things. Another one, else, is a reserved word, and we're going to see the use of these today in this class. They are case sensitive. So here is one identifier, capital S, excuse me, little t, capital N-O. Gosh, student could be student number, something like that. Here we have the same, to our brain, the same 4 letters, but to the computer, totally different. This here is not the same as that, nor is that the same as that. Hence, they are totally different. Again, totally different. To our brain, 4 letters mean the same thing, not to the computer. Again, different, okay? So these are case sensitive. We say they are all different identifiers. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 totally unique identifiers listed there. And we say they can be of any length. So what are some of the guidelines when we start to do that? Okay, meaningful name reflects the nature of, what do we mean? Need to create a meaningful name. Now, if I go call something X, and then what does that mean? Well, that means, okay, the student name. X does not immediately strike to me the student's name, okay? X might strike me as a point in a graph, okay? So that might be more appropriate where I use X. Student num is different to num of students. Student num, I would probably think student number. Num of students, I'm probably thinking that's the number of students. So we've got meaningfulness to it. Readable. Okay, student num, not student number. This, okay, this one here is really quite readable. And off the top of my head, I go, well, that makes sense. This one, not so easily read off the top. We need to make sure we are consistent. If we do some kind of abbreviation, we need to be consistent in our abbreviations, okay? We use case, we need to be consistent. When we start to use indentation, it needs to be consistent. Consistent, consistent, consistent. And avoid overly long names, okay? The number of students at the university. Wow. We go, yeah, that makes perfectly sense. When I'm writing a program that's going to be used for counting students, probably that might be sufficient, or that might be sufficient. So we need to make sure it's clear, but it does not need to be ridiculously long. Okay, that's important. Let's have a look at some examples. I've said here, this is a good one. Student num. Identification number of the student. Very long, very complex, extremely large cognitive load. Now, we say use the underscore to good effect and rarely. In Java, you'll find the Java naming convention doesn't generally use underscores. If you're using Python, the Python naming convention often uses underscores. Capitalization, use it to good effect, always. And here are some of the Java identifier name conventions. Constants, okay? Constants are all uppercase, all right? All uppercase. When you create a class, the class needs to be capitalized. Okay, so this, or public class, this is a class. So capitalized means the first letter of each word is a capital letter. And you'll note, as we've pointed out before, there's no spaces. Okay? Now, internally capitalized methods and variables, camel case. What do we mean here? Public void, this is a method. So the very first letter is lowercase, and then from then on, each letter for each starting letter of a word is capitalized, and that is called camel case. And this is the convention that is expected within Comp 1007. Private double this, so we've got lowercase, uppercase, uppercase, uppercase. Again, reiterating, this is the convention we need to be using for Comp 1007. Indentation. Indenting and space statements, and spacing statements, I should say, reduce the cognitive load because it becomes easy to see what is there and sort of you get the logic flow of it. It reduces, I said, cognitive load, and the other thing it does, which is really important, okay, increases readability and maintainability. And you'll hear a lot about readability and maintainability throughout not just this unit, but throughout your degree. Okay, indent code as you go, don't leave it for later. Really important. We tend to want to write code and do things and then go back and do all the extra stuff. Okay, at the same time, thinking back to the development principles. The last principle was write and document your code, and you do that together. Let's have a look at some good Java code. Okay, so if we look at good Java code, what we're looking at here, we've got some interesting things. Int x and y, double average, we've created a scanner, we're getting the next int, and we've got what's known down here as a method. Alright, so it's looking pretty good. And you can see my indentation, and it makes it quite simple to understand. That is not good. Okay? There's no indentation, there's nothing that helps us to identify things. So the cognitive load immediately is significantly increased and can take away from your understanding of the code and then being able to write really good code around it. I say no indentation, no line spacing, brackets, alignment, all of those things. Very difficult to follow. Comments. Let's take a look at them. So, what are they? They're comments, statements in non-programming language that describe the code. So this is pure, in this case, not pure, but English, just English statements that describe what this section of code is doing, or maybe what a particular, variable is used for. Okay, now they should be used for the program, or comments should be used for our program, and I say or class, and we include them when we start to, or the things we include, I should say, got a bit tongue twisted there, and you get the lot. Our comments should start with an author's name, who wrote the code, a description or a purpose of the overall program and class. So at the beginning of our program or class, we have this overall description, and dates. Who and when were they? Who modified and when were they modified? Really important that all of that is there because it gives us a record, an audit trail of what's happened and what's going on and why they did things. We use comments when we write these things called methods, and you'll see a lot more about methods further into the unit. And again, I say there's the method contract, which sounds very complex, but it's not really. What comes into the method or the function, you're used to functions from a maths perspective when we have f of x, and we have things that come into it. So a function is something like that. There's the things that come in, there's the things that go out, and we assert it should do something. So we've got the purpose and, again, the dates and who modified them. Really important that these things are there within our comments. Okay, and what you need to know is these things are required for all of your programs and classes that you write. You must be producing these things, okay? Really important that you are. So let's have a look at commenting your code. We have one comment type which is called an inline comment, and you see that here. We've got, okay, let's get my pen working, int pos tally, and I've got a description about that thing, about that variable. We'll keep a count of the positive values greater than 0. The other type is a comment block, and that looks something along these lines, okay? And I've got this whole block that is set aside for the comment. So here we have a program, okay, an app, and we've got up here a comment block, okay? I've got some inline comments, that's just describing what would go on here, another inline comment, and this is a method, okay, and I've got up here a comment block which describes the method to divide two integers as reals, and you can see when that was created and worked with, talking about the parameters and what it returns and exports. So that gives you a pretty good idea around comments and the use of comments within coding standards. And as I said, these are things that are now expected within your code.